From Canadian Food Focus, this is Ask a Farmer. I'm your host, Clinton Monchuk, a Saskatchewan farmer. In this podcast, we talk to food experts to answer your questions about your food. Welcome to the podcast, everybody. Today we're going to be talking about vertical farming. So, as a farmer, some of the biggest risks that I deal with every year are related to the weather. We have so much uncertainty when it comes to rain and heat and frost, wind. Heck, we even have tornadoes that rip through our place. So there's a lot of disasters that can happen as a result of the weather. And this ends up causing a lot of sleepless nights for us as farmers and ranchers, trying to make sure that we can grow the food that we provide to Canadians and people throughout the world. Now, what if we could take the biggest risk of farming out of the equation? Vertical farming has been developed throughout Canada as a way to reduce some of these food risks and provide localized food options for certain food products. Today we have Alida Burke with us from Growcer, which is a Canadian startup modular vertical farming company, and she's going to explain a little bit more about how vertical farming fits into our food system. How are you doing today, Alida?
Not too bad, but I'm excited to be here.
It's great to have you on. Maybe explain some of your background and how you got to where you are today.
My name is Alida Burke. I'm the co-founder and CFO here at Growcer. Born and raised in the Ottawa area, and ultimately where Growcer got its start. My business partner and I were studying at the University of Ottawa, specifically in business and in social enterprise. So looking at how you can intersect business, environment, and social considerations into building a business. And so while we were at the University of Ottawa, we were fortunate enough to go up to Northern Canada for the first time and have that very common sticker shock experience where food prices are quite high, and it spurred us to want to do something about it. So was about 8 or 9 years ago now. Wow. And from there, we've kind of just been building Growcer ever since. And supporting farmers and new farmers across Canada to be able to grow food locally in their communities.
Vertical farming, it's a little different. It's pretty new. Do you want to just walk us through what vertical farming is and just some of the things around that and even maybe some of the differences between, say, what a vertical farm is and what a modular farm is?
Yes, for sure. It's definitely a great question and one we get a lot. Vertical farming is almost an all-encompassing term to talk about indoor growing in a controlled environment setting. And the vertical usually references vertical stacks. Let's say you can see this in a warehouse farm, usually in larger cities in Canada, or in what we do here at Growcer, which we use the term modular farming, but that's mostly in the sense that our containers are modular. So you kind of plug them in and can move them and things like that. But in its core, it's still vertical farming. Now, you also will use terms like hydroponic farming or aeroponics. And so vertical farming, you can use those different types of methods, which is more so how you farm. So hydroponics, you're growing food without soil, and it's typically using water as its main medium to grow the plants. Aeroponics, it's slightly different in that it's usually suspended in air, and it's kind of water pellets going to the plants is a bit of a different approach. But then you can also use hydroponic farming. You'll see it typically in greenhouses as well, where that doesn't encompass vertical farming. So vertical usually is indoors, controlled, and in those typical stacks.
Do you want to just walk through, what are some of those foods that would actually be supplied through these vertical farms in an effort to feed people in downtown Calgary or downtown wherever?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, because that's how we also got introduced to this concept of hydroponic vertical farming. Was, we weren't farmers ourselves originally. We were more interested in the social and the business aspect pertaining to growing. And so at its core, why it was interesting to us was in this Canadian landscape, you can't grow year-round in many places across Canada. And so hydroponics can be used and vertical farming can be used to grow a variety of different types of crops. But typically what you'll see are leafy greens as the staple crop. And usually that is because it is a quick turnover crop, so you can grow it much more quickly in a vertical or hydroponic farming method than you could in that traditional soil-based method. So you're looking at usually from seed to harvest of about 6 weeks or so.
Oh, wow.
And other types of leafy green adjacent things. So let's call it spinach, arugula, and then you go into your herbs as well, your mint, your basil, things of that nature. So you can grow other crops as well. Like there's a lot of development being done for strawberries and how you can do that in a economically viable way in a fully indoor setting. But you'll see the staple crops being lettuce and leafy greens.
So it's interesting because you mentioned really it takes away some of that need to especially import some of these products during the winter time, typically from California, but also say Mexico or Central America, which then, obviously you have that transportation coming in. And I think there's just a heightened level of just awareness, right? That with some of the transportation that takes place with some of our products. But I do have to ask, and I actually have spinach every day and I love my strawberries. Is there a difference in the taste of this? Like, is it different when you're growing this where it's on artificial light versus natural light? I don't know if it is, or with the soils, or hydroponics or aeroponics was something that brand new. I never even heard of that until you mentioned it. So is there any difference? I assume that you've tasted quite a few of these different products, right?
Mm-hmm. I mean, for me personally, and I might be slightly biased in this instance, I think hydroponically grown produce, usually there's definitely a difference in quality which impacts that taste. If we call it from a research perspective, there's no specific difference that we would see in terms of nutrient quality or anything like that, or nutrient levels, I should say. But you're definitely touching on things like quality, right? You're able to harvest it much closer to when it would actually end up on store shelves or on your plate
Right.
at home. And then you're also growing typically a different variety of lettuce or other types of leafy green things that you wouldn't typically see coming from California. So typically that is that romaine, hearts and things like that you would see at the grocery store. Whereas different types of things that a lot of our farmers grow are, let's say, butter crunch lettuces. At its core there, I think it's just an interesting taste because it's not typically what you would see at the grocery store.
Yeah, I've never actually heard you said butter lettuce.
Yeah, butter crunch.
Butter crunch lettuce. You got to tell me what's butter crunch lettuce. Because I want to find this. It sounds good.
If you look at it and it's in your hand, let's say, it kind of almost looks like a flower. It has a softer, and that's why it's referenced as butter head or butter crunch, let's call it, is because it has almost like a butter-like consistency is what it's referred to. So it's just a tastier product, and it's one that almost all of our clients are growing because people love to eat it.
Yeah. It sounds like it would be nutrient dense too, if it's something like that too. But from your point of view, why is there maybe a stronger push towards this now than there has been in the past? And just interesting to hear your insight on that.
What we've seen here in Canada, there's a few key reasons. The first has been that year-round availability. We work with a lot of clients that are in remote places in Canada or, are less accessible. And especially over the last few years with, the challenges with supply and getting things to the end consumer has definitely rattled what we would say is the norm and what you can rely upon on a consistent basis. So having something that is local that you can understand and know that there's a consistent supply and that it's, meters from, let's say, the grocery store or the end consumer is a big pull, especially in the wanting to know where your food comes from. And that local food movement has been a massive driver over the last few years to bring it back to that neighborhood level. The second one is also transportation costs. And I think you touched on this. I believe it's about 90% of our lettuce is imported and mostly from California and Mexico. And so by the time it reaches store shelves, the quality sometimes is just not quite up to par or what we would like to see. So a lot of our clients are growing steps away from where the client can kind of pick it up and bring it home. So for example, the Muskoka Good Foods Co-op, they're in the Muskoka region of Ontario, and they have a farm just steps outside of their cooperative store. And so they've replaced all of the lettuce that they would typically have on the store shelves for folks coming through town, is now grown in their parking lot. And they're able to bring down their price that they can offer because that transportation cost is gone. So it's things like that that we've seen consistently being some of those key drivers in terms of reliability, transportation, and quality. A few other considerations that I didn't touch on would also be yield and water consumption. The first and one of the important factors with growing indoors, in particular with hydroponic farming, is around water consumption. So typically, if you're comparing the output of, let's say, lettuce in a hydroponic farm compared to growing in soil, you're using about 90 to 95% less water than you would typically use. So it's a big factor, especially where water scarcity is an issue, and is where you'll typically see also the proliferation of these types of farms because of water being a major constraint in growing. The other one is yield. So for our farm footprint, you're looking at the 40 by 10 structure. You're looking at typically about 800 to 900 heads a week is what you can produce, depending on your crop variety.
Heads of lettuce, right?
Heads of lettuce, let's call it. Yeah. If you're looking at herbs, it's a little bit different, but let's call it heads of lettuce. So from seed to harvest, you're typically looking at about 6 weeks, which is about 30 to 50% faster than what you would have in kind of in soil growing. So it's one of the key factors is why you see those types of crops more commonly in a hydroponic farm, is just because you can produce them really well in that type of environment. And an important factor with hydroponic farming in general is just the efficiency of space in what you're growing.
And I, just to kind of ask you a question about this, and would it be kind of the same if I go and I think of our garden on the farm and we have, lettuce and cucumbers and stuff like that, the things that you could grow in this kind of a situation. And for whatever reason, when you have that ability to let it ripen just a little bit more, and I don't know what the scientific, how much more, but when you have the ability to let that ripen a little bit more and then, take a bite of that, lettuce or a prepared lettuce or a cucumber or whatever it is that day, there is a little bit of a different, I don't know if it's more your mind than anything, but it does taste different, right? So are you finding with some of these, so for example, that cooperative in Muskoka, like, are they finding that it actually tastes from their perspective better, even though nutritionally it's the same?
Mm-hmm. That's something that I receive constantly as that feedback. I know my mom tells me that all the time. She's like, I don't want to buy grocery store lettuce. I want lettuce from you. So it's something about it where it's the quality, and maybe that's mom speaking, but I think it's definitely a big one. For the Muskoka store, they harvest on a specific day. I think it's Wednesday or Thursday, and then by Saturday it's all sold. So I think there's definitely something about the product itself, whether it's just the varieties that they can grow and inherently maybe it's the varieties that are have a different taste, but consistently, I hear that all the time.
You have some great videos on YouTube, and I watch some of them. It's interesting how you control some of the aspects of, say, pests that I would have to deal with on my farm, right? So I obviously it's not a controlled environment, so you're going to have bugs, you're going to have weeds, you're going to have diseases and stuff like that. But your system, obviously, it's different, right? Because you have it's a modular type of a system. Do you want to explain a little bit how you control that environment to make sure you limit the introduction of different pests? But even at that, like, what do you do on that biosecurity side to make sure that things are staying to their optimum condition?
If you imagine what our type of technology looks like, it's a 40-foot shipping container esque style now. It's structurally insulated panels. building 40 by 10. So at its core, the best part is it's an enclosed system where you don't have, like you said, an open crop sort of situation. So that is good at keeping bugs out. Now the key factor is making sure that you don't bring bugs in to keep it so that it's a controlled environment for the plants to grow. So the big ones are the physical barriers. So maintaining a positive pressure sort of environment so that when you're coming in, there's also an air curtain, and some physical controls to make sure as much as possible you can keep good practices. The second piece is a lot of maintenance and cleaning. Like the majority of the time you spend in the farm is actually cleaning and making sure it's as clean of an environment as possible for the plants to grow than actually harvesting or some of those other tasks that are typically done. And then some clients typically might use some of those biological control products as well, whether that be beneficial predators that will eat the bad things in the farm. Let's say if you got aphids or if you had other sort of issues like that. Those are some of the key factors, but it's definitely all in the controls so that as much as possible you don't bring anything in, but when you do, you can pest scout and have those key procedures to make sure that you're maintaining your environment as clean as possible so that they don't proliferate.
Yeah. Which is great because it's a controlled environment, it's a little easier to introduce some of those things to take care of other bad things that might have come in. And we talked a lot about the some of the benefits around the vertical farms. Do you want to talk about how you see some of the technology changing in the future, because it's ever improving, right? And I see it on our farm too, right? Technology always gets better and better over time. But what do you see as some of those new leaps that are coming forward around vertical farming going into the future?
That's a great question. I think there's two key avenues that I see coming up again and again. One is in terms of what you can grow in an indoor environment that is meeting where the industry is at in terms of price point and things like that. So a lot of movement being done in strawberry production in terms of how you can grow strawberries indoors year round, especially in a place like Canada where that's just not possible, and other berries for that matter indoors. Now, there's more technical considerations for growing strawberries because they're a reproductive plant, and so there's pollination and other key variables that you don't need in a lettuce farm, let's call it.
Right.
And other types of crops like that. So strawberries, cucumbers, peppers, things like that, I think are at the forefront of what can be grown on an ongoing basis. And then the second is, where does automation play in a vertical farm? So for something like ours, where the footprint is relatively small, at this point in time, full automation doesn't make sense. It's too costly. But in some of these warehouse farms, you see more automation coming through, and how can you throw AI or robotics or other kind of factors into the mix to make it so that ultimately you're more efficient and can provide a lower cost product to the end consumer. But I think there's definitely, at least from our perspective, because we look at a smaller footprint, that is still a ways away in terms of something that makes sense for what we do, but definitely are the two biggest trends that I see in the vertical farming industry as a whole.
So this leads us perfectly into the Fun Farm fact for the podcast today. Did you know that the first ever hands-free vertical farm opened in British Columbia, March of 2023? It uses touchless technology from seeding right through to harvest. And this was taken from Bennett Jones here in 2024 when they did a little bit of a report on that. And it's interesting because you made the comment that the technology is getting better, but it doesn't make a lot of economic sense. So this, and similar to what we see with a lot of technologies, something comes out, it's really interesting, but doesn't necessarily make economic sense until you kind of fine tune it. And maybe some other companies come in and provide that service. Is that kind of where you think that might be an option later on in the future too for yourselves?
For sure. With warehouse farms, it makes a lot of sense because you're just dealing with a sheer amount of volume and square footage where you're able to kind of have that automation work really, really well. I think for us, we'll find probably a hybrid approach where you're finding some ways to automate certain processes in a small environment, or you then build up your processing capacity of, let's say, multiple farms going into one processing space that then has those pieces in there where you can bring that volume together to make it make sense. So definitely we'll see that in the future 100% as it evolves and grows for sure.
Okay, so now we want to understand a little bit more about Growcer. So this is, and again, I watch the videos. I really feel that this is a truly unique kind of company that you have, and it offers a little bit of, well, not a little bit, a lot of a solution to some food insecurity. But I want you to explain exactly how you develop this, and to all our listeners, so they can kind of understand a little bit more about who Growcer is and really what some of that target audience you're trying to get to is.
Mm-hmm. Yes, Growcer started in 2016 as actually more of a school initiative than anything else while we were at the University of Ottawa, kind of learning and implementing social enterprise considerations and facets into business. And I think we see that more and more now, and it's is a natural fit in agriculture too, in terms of how can you find ways from the environmental perspective and social perspective and how it all fits together. So we weren't farmers to begin with, so it was definitely a big learning curve. We got our first few farms. The first one was in Churchill, Manitoba, where we had a great partner with the Churchill Northern Study Centre to support the first of this type of farm in Canada to grow year-round, at least one, first of ours, I should say. And so that was a really pivotal point for us to see what worked, what didn't work, and continue to iterate on that type of technology on an ongoing basis. A lot of it is the inherent knowledge and process around growing in this type of technology on an ongoing basis. So it all comes with experience and learning. So from then, we have a network of just over 80 farms across Canada. They collectively grow about 10 million servings of vegetables every year, which is really great to see, and is really comes down to that community level too, of supporting local key initiatives. Whether, of course, the growing aspect is key, but then there's the other facets that come with that, where it's local job creation, local health facets. If there's certain key issues that you're looking to target, that this can kind of play an important part in. So as you've probably experienced with your farm, it's kind of brings people together. It's that community aspect that your farm supports. So it's those key facets that are so impactful, and that really kind of gets us up and going in the morning. But to go back to, I guess, that evolutionary process is really how we went through it, is a lot of learning as we're going over year with farm over farm, is perfecting that key operation to make sure people are successful.
So if I understand correctly, like the what tweaked your interest is when you went into a northern community where growing food is very limited, if at all, in some of these communities. So is that how you kind of felt that there was this need, that desire for some of these communities to actually have the option to get fresh, local produced food?
Yeah, 100%. It was originally we thought, maybe we can start a project where we work with a local community to grow food year round. And as we went through the process, we realized there wasn't a solution that we could tap into, that we could do it right away. So we kind of built the business that we had wished there was 8 years ago, with the support of communities that wanted to do this themselves. A big topic and a big theme that we've seen over the last 8 years has been around food sovereignty. How can we create a resilient local food system that is not 100% reliant on long supply chains that can be disrupted? And interestingly, over the last few years, we've seen that sentiment and that local food movement grow again, or grow consistently in the people that we speak to, as a key factor and a very important one, to make sure that they can rely on something that's local and that they can kind of grow and maintain themselves.
So do you want to touch on it? And here's your little bit of a claim to fame. So you were on Dragon's Den, and but just touch on your experience about this because it truly is interesting. The idea, the entrepreneurial nature of this to try and go forward, and maybe just give the listeners a little bit of a background on that.
Yes, we filmed back in 2018, and it was a really great experience. A little back behind the scenes is typically they'll go to city to you do your pitch basically to see if they will bring you to Toronto to do the full-fledged filming in downtown CBC headquarters. And we were fortunate enough to be able to move on to that process, and we officially aired in early 2019. And we had a really great experience. The only thing that kind of was a wrench in our plans was they wanted something visual that you could kind of see and touch and feel what it is that you do. So we thought, okay, we'll bring a full rack of produce that we were growing in Ottawa and have it on site and on set. Very difficult to bring that
I can imagine.
from Ottawa to Toronto. We had some high ambitions. And then what we learned was that you can't have any water on set, which is a challenge when you're growing hydroponically where it's all water.
All water.
So all the plants died overnight before we filmed the next day, but they did their creative magic. So you can tell if you're looking closely, but they got some good shots to kind of make sure you don't really see that they did not last and had a bit of a challenging on-screen debut, but it was a really great experience, and they were all very kind and supportive for that next generation of Canadian entrepreneurs, I guess you could say. So really great experience, and for us, we see it come back every once in a while, whether it's reruns or it used to be on some streaming services, and it's a great way for people to kind of get introduced to what we do. We've got a few farmers that came through that channel, and then a lot of people who are interested in this type of technology who might want to work for grocers. So it's a thing I hear a lot is, I saw your episode on Dragon's Den and XYZ. So it's been a really fruitful thing that has paid dividends over the last few years.
It's a feel-good story, right? Because you're trying to kind of help some of those communities that maybe, like we said, don't necessarily have access to the fresh food all the time. Do you feel this is one of those solutions that we need to really hone in on to allow the communities to actually have access to some of these nutrient-dense and good food that's grown locally?
For sure. I think for us, it's trying, our main goal and mission is to create some local resilient food networks, especially in areas where that's just not possible. And so where we started, and a lot of the folks that we've supported over the years has been in those remote and in many places Indigenous communities where there just isn't an option to grow year round, and a lot of want and intent to build something that's local so that they can rely on that year round. Over the past 8 or so years, though, we've seen that diversify too, in terms of a lot of our clientele are food cooperative stores that are looking to have a local option that they can have for their to have a quality product on the store shelves, especially in Western Canada. We see that a lot, and then farmers who are looking to diversify. We see that too in Southern Canada, where let's say they might be a dairy farm and are looking to grow crops as well. So it definitely wouldn't say that it will be a solution for everything, but definitely a strong tool in the tool chest, I guess you could call it, to complement and further strengthen, especially in these types of crops where otherwise it would have to be imported. So definitely, I think could be a really key facet as we continue to have climate shifts and challenges and reliability for year-round growing. I think this plays an important part in that.
So and how many do you have? I think you mentioned it before, but there's how many?
Yeah, we're just over 80 farms across
80
Canada.
farms, wow. So in terms of Growcer, what do you consider one farm to be? Is that like one container? Is it multiple containers? Like how do you kind of talk about that with one of your farms?
We typically call one container one farm, and then once we look at multiple farms, we usually call that a farmplex. So farmplex, let's call it, is something where it's a bit of a bigger footprint. But yeah, one farm is what we would call it.
And again, my mind always goes through the process that I have to go through and the labor that I have to find for my own farm in different seasons. But what is, like, does it take one full-time person, or is it a part-time person to run one of your modular vertical farms, or is it numerous people?
Typically, what you look at in terms of the labor in the farm is about 25 hours a week. So that includes all of the, cleaning, seeding, transplanting, harvesting, things like that. So more looking like part-time. And then once you have multiple farms, then you're able to kind of build out a team there to do all of that.
To do all of it. And it's interesting. So if you had this, the modular farm, are you able to grow various different products? So we talked about some of the leafy greens, but would you be able to also have, say, a portion of it that's strawberries?
And not strawberries specifically, just because it's a different method. So it's like a gutter system with a different substrate, we call it, and different lighting.
Okay.
However, in the type of growing of, let's say, leafy greens, you want to grow lettuce, spinach, arugula, those types of things you can grow in the one unit. Yeah. There, the way that we optimize it is the best neutral for all of those different types of things. But then some of our farmers, like Nipissing First Nation, they have multiple farms, and they have each units dialed in for a specific crop. So let's say in one farm they do the spinach, more like cold weather crops, and another it's all lettuce, so it might be a few degrees warmer. So different things like that where you're honing in some key variables. But with something like strawberries, that would be a little bit more difficult.
Yeah. So now, how much food does one of these containers actually produce? Like, is it enough for how many people? I don't even know.
Yeah, it depends on how many farms you have, but if we go down at its core, one farm, you're looking at about 800 to 900 heads of produce per week. So Typically we look at that if you're looking at one piece of produce per person or serving, that's about 2,000 to 3,000 people, let's say. But if we look at it and quantify it in a different perspective, let's say you have a CSA box where you're having a few different types of crops within that, then you're looking, let's say, approximately 115 to 120 boxes per week. So one of our farm partners they're called Alterio, and Alterio School, I should say. They're in Alberta, and they're agriculture school where the kids learn about raising sheep and cattle, and they have bees as well, and they also do this type of farming. And so they not just grow it, they also sell it. So they have a CSA box in their community. So this is maybe a good way of visualizing what that looks like in terms of supporting their town in Alberta.
I do believe that fundamentally changes your mindset about food when you have the opportunity to grow it, right? Like it just, it provides an experience that really is priceless, right?
100%. It's a hands-on experience that you wouldn't otherwise get, except if you were maybe in a farming family.
I want to say thank you very much, Alida, for being part of the podcast today. It really was super interesting and great for our listeners to understand a little bit more about vertical farming. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank you for taking the time to listen to our Ask a Farmer podcast. We at Canadian Food Focus value the input from our listeners and ask that you share the podcast with your friends and family. Remember, this is a two-way street, so we seek your input for future segments that are of interest to you about food and farming. To do this, please click on the Ask Us icon at the top of our website, CanadianFoodFocus.org. While you're there, feel free to follow our numerous social media links and sign up for our newsletter. This segment was produced and edited by Angela Larson, research and writing by Dorothy Long and Penny Eaton, music by Andy Elson. I'm your host, Clinton Monchuk, and from all of us at Canadian Food Focus, we wish you good health and great eats.